And welcome back, everybody, to Double Down with Breslo, where we cover the world of, you know what, I always screw this. I always want to say the world of sports betting, but it's the business of sports betting all around the world. And today we truly go around the globe. We hop the pond over to the UK. And with us, we've got, through the magic of technology, Andy Clerkson, the founder of Red Knot Communications and longtime executive in the sports betting industry, here to give us observations about what's going on in Europe and what's moving to the U.S. Andy, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, James. Good to see you.
So a couple things.
Dark and cold here, so nice to talk.
Well, I'm coming from L.A., so we got the opposite. So somewhere in between is. But yeah, I do love London. Been there a few times. I assume you've made it out to L.A. before.
I actually was based in LA at various stages in my career, and
nice.
Just around 2019, I was in LA every other week, flying from London to LA to work on Fox Bet. So that was yeah.
Well, hopefully you should come back soon. It may not be here soon, the way things are going, but so far it's alive. We have a big debate tonight between our governor and the governor of Florida, which should be pretty fun.
Yes.
Fun watch. Yeah, exactly. So some housekeeping measures. First of all, Red Knot. How come explain the name Red Knot. Where'd you come up with that?
It's a good one, actually. The red knot is the smallest and most powerful migratory bird. So you should check out a red knot. The red knot moves pretty much from the Arctic to the Antarctic every year. I don't know how many miles that is, but it's a tiny little bird. It goes all the way down the east coast, actually, of America. And we thought it was a really good name for a small agency that works across the world and can be anywhere at no time, and is powerful but cute. So there you go. That's the rest.
Wow, I love it. The only issue is you got to explain it, because I assume most people don't know that, but it's a fun explanation. I'd never heard of this bird.
It works well. It's a lovely little bird, and I'm sure now you'll start noticing them wherever you go. So yeah,
from the North Pole to the South Pole.
Pretty much every year. And he's tiny.
Wow.
He's like a little guy, right? He's like a little guy. He's a few inches wide. It takes him a few days to get down there, but he does it.
Slow and steady, just like you guys, huh? All right. And then one more housekeeping measure. You know, I got to ask you about Maxim. Andy apparently was editor of Maxim Magazine?
I actually was a publisher. Yeah, I ran it for 7 years. 7 years.
Wow, that must have been a good time.
It was an amazing time. I think I'm credited with having started the Super Bowl party for Maxim, actually. So yeah, 98 until 2006. It was
how could you ever give up that position? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm really questioning what's going on in your head.
Yeah, well, I had a family, and had to kind of get a bit.
Oh, that was the mistake.
Yeah, there you go.
Having a family and running Maxim Magazine is probably a little incongruent.
Absolutely. But it was an amazing time. Yeah, I think I moved to New York in 98, and we basically sold the company in 2007. It's carried on since then, but the original team on it were primarily English, actually. But then we brought Americans in. So it was a phenomenal time, and I have some of the photos to somewhere. I have some of the photos ingrained in my memory, actually. It's funny because I just happened to see that brand recently, because I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but we were looking for a Halloween party here in LA, and sure enough, there was the Maxim Halloween party. So, I mean, what is the current status of this company as far as you know? Yeah, well, actually, it was bought by private equity when we sold. So we launched it. We had a Maxim UK that launched in 1995. And then we took it to America in 1997. It became explosive, huge, biggest men's magazine, one of the biggest magazines in America. Then it became one of the biggest men's magazines in the world, actually. We had 40 editions worldwide. And then my kind of boss was a guy called Felix Dennis, who was an inspirational and a bit of a kind of crazy entrepreneurial millionaire dude. He sold it to private equity when a bunch of the original team, like myself, left. It then went through a little bit of a kind of tough time. The internet had come along. It was not as easy to sell magazines. Paper prices had gone up. Advertising was kind of ramping down a bit, and it went through a series of owners dropping in maybe circulation. But recently, it was bought by a guy, I don't know him, but he's run the magazine for the last few years. And where they've really seen, I think, a way for revenues is to keep that kind of party event stream going, something that we started back then. And it was always a powerful brand, very powerful brand for a certain age group. And actually, I think he's done a very good job out of that. And I think, rather than people sitting down and reading magazines now, there's really a website. There is a magazine, but it's not the big revenue driver. And they make a lot of money out of Super Bowl and Halloween parties, obviously.
Yeah. So you think there is still a print edition of it?
I think there is a print edition. Yeah.
Because, Playboy doesn't print anymore.
No, Maxim certainly printed up to the last, maybe just over a year ago. I mean, if you remember, there was a Maxim bet. There was a license deal that the guys at Maxim did with a gaming company, and actually launched Maxim Bet in the US. Sadly, no longer with us, which is one of those smaller brands who we've seen have kind of fallen out as the US market has consolidated so quickly and so heavily into the big two, and then maybe the next three or four. So, but yeah, it's a strong brand, up there for a while. Like we competed with Sports Illustrated, Playboy, as you said, and really developed, a kind of a brand out of nothing for guys, I think, that were at college and just leaving.
Yeah. No, amazing brand. And, women and gambling, that kind of goes together for men, so that deal makes sense. And seems like you're hitting all the vices. You're with women, and also in the gambling business. I know you've been with a number of companies, and now you founded Red Knot. So tell us what Red Knot does.
Well, Red Knot actually was formed by myself and a couple of friends who've been in the industry for a long time, in the media industry as well as the gaming industry. Because we felt when the US market exploded, especially the US market, there really wasn't any kind of strategic communications, PR firms that understood the sports betting industry the way that we felt we did, and we knew the media. And it's such a huge ecosystem. We've got FanDuel and DraftKings and now Fanatics and Bet365 and MGM at the top of this system. And then underneath there are just literally hundreds into thousands of B2B suppliers of various products, from casino games to pricing infrastructure to payments to fraud and compliance, RegTech, you name it. And we felt that there were so many good companies out there, and technology companies especially, where the guys were looking for, the companies were either looking for partnerships or maybe investment in the business community, have built great products, have a great business, but don't really know how to tell that story and rise above the competition. So we felt there was a really good niche for people that understood the market. And that's where we've sat, and we've represented a number of companies, some from the top level, like Stronach, First Content, the household names, all the way through. Really, our sweet spot has been good companies selling product into the big operators, and we've managed to represent companies that have then been acquired by some of those. So it's a PR firm, true to its nature. Now PR is all social, primarily, as much as traditional media. But we've really got our experience and hooks kind of into the business and technology community as well as the sports betting.
Cool. I've heard people say that, that startups in the US is just a much more common thing than in Europe, so that the ecosystem that's developed in the US as a result of the explosion of sports betting has just been phenomenal compared to perhaps what developed in Europe.
A lot of the companies actually have been kind of European, some of the companies that we brought in, and they've seen the US as the market to move into. But you're absolutely right that it was the explosion of, or the regulation changing in the US that really created just a phenomenal demand, and a phenomenal kind of industry below those operators, where people are applying their trade in the US. But yeah, I mean, the US has always been an easier, I would say, as somebody started businesses on both sides of the pond, has always been an easier place to raise capital, to get investment behind you, to be able to start a company. I'd say that the UK has always been very positive for for startups, but there are, there's just less enthusiasm sometimes here and optimism, which means you have to do a lot of work to raise not so much cash. So yeah, it's been a massive springboard in the US. And I say now, we're a few years in since PASPA was repealed, we are starting to see, things normalize. People are focused on product more than, say, just branding. We've seen some of the companies do exceptionally well. Some have obviously fallen by the wayside. But I think, if anything, the US has moved far faster than the European markets did. We always thought it would. But if I think back to, kind of the birth of online gaming in the UK, which was in the early 2000s, then we hit mobile phones around 2010, 2011. From that period, we're talking, kind of 20 years to get to a point that the US has got to in 4. And by what point is that? I mean, kind of big consolidation, major product launches, and an unbelievable industry, with billions of dollars in handle. So yeah, it's been it's moved quickly. I think that'll also mean that the US moves quickly to regulate. I think that we'll see not just states regulating now. I think we've seen quite a slowdown recently, but I think that a move where the operators need to think about how they protect the vulnerable, how they are doing responsible gaming activity, all of these things that again took a long while to come through in the UK, I think we'll see come pretty quickly in the US.
And what are some things that you think are in Europe, because it's more advanced and been around longer, that the US hasn't gotten to yet?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. The one that we thought in the early days, and actually, has now really taken off in the US, was a focus on what we called bet builders in the UK, but are called single game parlays. And that kind of product drive. Many years ago, it became very much European books, really led by the UK, all became focused on product. You had to have easy to find markets. You needed to be able to build markets on a single match. You needed to be able to create those in-game parlays. You needed to be able to bet on props. You needed in-play betting. And that became the focus of the big companies like Bet365, like Sky Bet, and William Hill and so on. And then that was not there, maybe understandably so, from 2017, 2018, 2019 in the US. But I think FanDuel really, really focused in and targeted that. And now the other guys, certainly DraftKings, have caught up, and Fanatics and Bet365 are now offering those kind of, maybe not so much micro markets, but, kind of ways to build on props. I think, in that sense, there was always a betting community that's going to bet, but to really engage young bettors, female bettors, general people that maybe are interested, betting's up against, going to the cinema or buying a Netflix subscription or whatever it might be as a fun activity, going bowling or something. You needed something that could capture the imagination. And I think that, prop bets around players and bets around the ability to put together a parlay where you can get a bigger payout is what's really been the driver, I think, in the last year in the US. But that came from UK. That was all built here.
Mm-hmm. So a bet basically on whether Patrick Mahomes will have over under a certain number of passing yards parlayed to a couple other player bets in a game.
Exactly. I think that, that's how you can build a big payout off of a small stake. That's how you can get $100 off a $10 stake. That's what a lot of people coming into the game want to do. And that's where you can kind of find some real kind of enjoyment. Obviously, having technologies that can run those products has been the key. So you've got to rely on some super smart, modeling guys that can predict and model in game. You've got to rely on technologies that are low latency, and you've got to have great marketeers and great design product that can get a complex set of numbers in front of people on a mobile phone that actually makes sense. So I think that's where the real kind of talent, is going to lie, and is lying in the US. I've been interested to see the Fanatics Sportsbook, which looks kind of super simple, streamlined. One of the problems for sportsbooks in the US when launched, and actually in the UK And still there is that ultimately you're dealing with a big list, right? Whatever it is, you're just reading a list. It's like, okay, football, NFL, Broncos versus Giants, and you're just kind of going down, and it's not that exciting as a design technique. So to try and bring in, you know, different visualizations, ways to simply swipe left and right to build on bets, you've got to try and make these things feel like the modern, you know, the modern app world. I think we're still a step away from voice. One of the clients that we work with, actually, a Red Knot, is a super innovative company called VoxBet. They have mastered, they basically mastered the kind of lexicon of sports betting, the dictionary of sports betting, so that you can speak into your phone and they can come up with a bet immediately. You can say, you know, Mahomes over 375 yards, whatever, and it will come up in your as a text message in your or a text in your phone. I think that is definitely going to be the future. We'll be able to talk our bet to our TV, to our Alexa, in our kitchen, in our car. But that's still a little way off, probably, in terms around, you know, how that gets regulated.
Yeah, cool. All right, we got to take our first break, and we'll be back with more, talking to Andy Clerkson, founder of Red Knot Communications, direct from London.
We give game day a whole new meaning.
Ready for business?
In brief,
Bloomberg Briefs puts the power of Bloomberg to work for you with over 15 industry-specific newsletters available only by subscription. Each offers proprietary data, researched and written by acknowledged experts. Top analysts, dedicated economists, senior business editors, all presented in a concise, uncluttered environment.
It gives me the edge I need.
Go to BloombergBriefs.com right now for your free 30-day trial.
And welcome back, everybody, to Double Down with Breslo. We are speaking with Andy Clerkson, the founder of Red Knot Communications in London, England, and talking about some of the difference between what's going on in Europe and the U.S. Fill us in on the latest on this. Am I right that there's some type of advertising ban that's being put in place in some European countries?
Yeah, actually, in a few countries across the world, I think Australia now has a full ban on betting companies.
So let's just stop right there. I want to make sure what you know what we're talking about. So Australia, which, by the way, is known for sports betting, right? Been around there for a long time. Is it literally 000 advertising?
Zero on broadcast, I think it is. And digital is, you know, you can, but there's certain restrictions around digital. What we're seeing in the UK primarily is the start of a ban on any sports shirts. So, you know, the Premier League football shirts, I think 7 out of 20 teams in the Premier League at one point were sponsored by a betting company. There's been a big push. I think at the moment we're about to go into an election year, so I'm not sure much is going to happen in the next few months, but that looks like a pretty likely restriction. Some of that is interesting because many of the sponsors, actually betting sponsors of UK football teams, do not actually ply their trade in the UK. They are Asian betting companies that sponsor the shirts of the UK teams because they know the audience in Asia is watching the UK Premier League. So it's kind of like an interesting dilemma. Obviously, a lot of money has gone into Premier League from betting companies, but we have quite a push down in the UK in terms from the media, from the government, on gaming and betting regulation. I think one of the big things I noticed from working from US and UK is that there's a different kind of excitement in the US around the potential of sports betting as an engagement activity. Yes, obviously people are concerned about, you know, protecting vulnerable people or anyone that could be addicted in any way, and making sure that the appropriate kind of responsible measures are in place. But I think there's a general understanding that, you know, people love to bet on the game, that can be fun, and that it brings an even bigger engagement into the game. In the UK, we have had that for some time, but and people have been, kind of happy to see it. But I think, if anything, the industry doesn't regulate itself very well. So when we see big sporting events like a World Cup, we'll find that the big betting companies in the UK will take as many ad slots as possible on, broadcast, linear TV. They'll buy up every piece of real estate, and then you get a backlash. You just do. You've got your mom and your grandma and the kids all watching the game, and all
we want to see some beer commercials, not just sports betting commercials.
Exactly. We need the old Maxim commercial back. So, but I think that's so that's what's kind of happened in the UK, and I think that ultimately, by not regulating themselves sensibly, maybe being a little bit, taking what they can in terms of getting in front of people, there's been quite a pushback from the government. So,
well, look, I'm seeing the same thing happening here very rapidly. I mean, where the leagues went from opposing sports betting and saying that the integrity of the game is going to be shot if we allow this, and then overnight they seem to have zero concern about it, to the point where the announcers of the game are shilling for one of the sports betting companies, and their ads are everywhere, and it just went from 180-degree difference as far as their position. It felt like almost overnight. Yeah. And yes, we are absolutely, and I'm in California, so I probably get less here than they get in other places, but I feel that the ads are just everywhere. But as far as I can see, in the US, I haven't heard any pushback yet on that from, I mean, maybe you know better than I do if there's any states that are pushing back on that in the US.
I think there's been a few. Yeah, there's been a few. It was a governor of New York who was kind of trying to push through bills around kind of banning actually sports betting advertising. I think we're a long way off from any of that. I do think the leagues have to be careful. It was interesting. I was working at FoxBet, so the kind of joint venture partnership between PokerStars and Fox Sports. 2018, 2019, just as everything was coming online. And we were talking to all of the sports leagues about their promotions, and what we could do, and could we work with the different leagues. And you probably know the NBA and the NHL were very forward thinking about betting. They kind of considered it, I think, way before PASPA was repealed. And we could start to do kind of deals with those guys quite quickly. And they knew exactly what was possible, what wasn't possible, when you could use players, when you couldn't use players. And they had a lot of rules. The NFL were not negative at first, but they really wouldn't let anybody do anything, right? And we know that that's kind of one of the things with the NFL generally is they kind of dominate the things that they operate with. And as someone that used to run Maxim parties, Super Bowls, I know how much they like to kind of dominate, fair enough, and kind of own the environment. But what was really happening, I think, with the NFL was they weren't sure of how they wanted to respond and how they were going to participate. So for the first few years, it looked like from afar or from outside, they were negative about sports betting and were not interested in being involved. That wasn't actually the case from what I could see. What they were doing was just talking to everybody and working out how they were going to kind of, maximize, their own involvement. And the MLB actually was always pretty reticent and has still been slower. And I think that was more on they just felt that it wasn't right for the league at the time.
Although I do have to interject and say that I'll never forget watching the World Series. And I'm talking about a solid maybe 4 years ago. This would have been probably your time because it was Fox and it was Joe Buck. And I'll never forget Joe Buck saying, and coming up to the plate is whoever it was. And by the way, the likelihood of him hitting a home run, if you want to place a bet on that, it's go to Fox. But I'm like, whoa, man, here we are, the World Series, the announcer, and he's talking about betting on this next player. That must have been your idea.
That was our idea. Yeah, that was our idea, by the way. We were trying to get integrations in. I mean, we wanted a FoxBet logo behind the home plate, to be honest, just kind of floating there. But you know what? I think it's what the sports channels saw, which is what we were very kind of excited about. And I think Fox were really on the cutting edge of this one, was they just saw the engagement levels that the betting and gamification brings to the viewership, and the time. And actually, we talked about what happens in the US, UK. We saw that in the UK. I work with Sky Bet, who are one of the biggest broadcasters of sports in the UK. They have Sky Sports, and then they had their own betting company. And that was kind of what Fox Bet was based on. And Sky Bet had a lot of research which showed that people that were engaged in betting, or even sometimes kind of free-to-play games, but from those companies around the game, were more engaged in the viewership. You know, they were staying longer, they were watching the end of the game, they were getting involved during the, you know, doing things during halftime. So I think there is there's a very good symbiotic relationship between the gamification of the individual experience and the sport that you're watching, making it less of a passive viewership.
Well, look, and this is going to lead to a question, but you know, at the end of the day, it all comes down to, is this an activity that we should be concerned about people being engaged in? For instance, drinking, should we be concerned about people being involved in drinking? Yeah, because it can lead to some pretty bad things. Should we make it illegal? No, we've tried that before. So sports betting, and since Europe is somewhere further advanced in the US, I mean, bottom line, what are the studies showing as far as addiction problems in Europe since you guys legalized all this?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I don't think there's any conclusive evidence here at all that people are more addicted because it's been, you know, more open. There have always been people that we know that sports bet and gamble. When it is a black market activity, I think we'll find that there are far more dangers than a regulated, listed companies with, you know, because you can get yourself in a lot of trouble very quickly if you owe people money. But I think that what we've seen is that the industry has to be fully focused, and not just internally doing this. It has to be presenting itself, PRing itself, something that Red Knot does, but you know, making the narrative work for the audience, which is the country here, that this is an activity that people will do, that people enjoy, but that they've got responsible regulatory technologies that allow them to spot all the signs of anybody that could have a problem or anybody that is doing something illegal, and that they are fully aware of that audience and know how to respond, talk, and intervene if there is a problem. And I think one of the things that will save the industry here, because obviously as things get ubiquitous, of course, you're opening up to more people, is the fact that the technologies are, I guess, you know, are improving, new technologies are arriving every day that allow you to spot all of this activity. So now there are many companies that can, you know, we know how long someone's been playing a game. We know, you know, you can set self rules. We know what times of day people play when it's a dangerous time of day to be playing. We know the kind of spend that people shouldn't be spending. All of that stuff is all driven by machine learning, you know, algorithms. You don't need loads of people. You can put up red flags and you can stop people's involvement in betting if you need to. So I think, you know, having that technology at our disposal now is the way to make sure that gambling companies operate responsibly. And that's what they're doing in the UK for sure. But they haven't been very good at managing the narrative around it.
What about this? I'm not even aware of what the rules are in the US. Max Bet. Is there max bet rules in most of Europe?
No. You can set your own rules basically. So you have, you know, when you sign up to any one of the betting apps, you will be asked to set your own limits at first. So that could be $100 a day, could be $100 a year. There are, if you try to bet at a higher level, obviously the company is going to want to investigate and look at you anyway, because one, it's not just around vulnerability. The company doesn't want to be taken for a ride by someone with information they don't have. But what we're doing in the UK, actually, James, which might be of interest, and I think this is where the US will go very quickly, is we now have access to kind of open banking. So the rules that are going to come into the UK here, they are affordability checks. So what was about to happen in the UK is that people that are betting, if they bet over a certain amount or try to bet over a certain amount in a day, a week, or a month, and those limits aren't high, like $200 in a month, say, they will have to show bank statements or affordability checks to the bookmaker to show that they have the means to fund their betting activity. So that's very full of friction, is onerous. People don't want to do that, obviously, and that could be a very bad thing for the betting companies. But there are now technologies that allow you, so if you have the funds to be able to bet and you enjoy betting and you've got the money and the disposable income to bet $100 a month or whatever it might be, you can actually sign up with one or two companies that allow you now to link that straight to your banking system, which is all anonymous, but you get it, so that actually you can show you have that money and you don't have any friction. And then the betting company allows you to bet. So yes, we're basically getting affordability checks coming into the UK.
Would that also theoretically allow somebody to bet on credit?
No. So there's never been an allowance for credit. And that's the other thing you've got to think about here. And the same in the US. There is no regulation that's ever allowed people to run up a credit line. Mm-hmm. And that actually is a great point, because I think that shows why a regulated betting market is always going to be superior.
Yeah, the thing that's dangerous about the bookie is he extends credit. So
exactly.
you bet as much as you want, and then on Monday night football, you try to get healthy from the weekend, and you double up on everything, and the next thing you know, you got a guy knocking on your door.
Exactly. There's always you don't want the settling up text.
But I have also thought, simply from a business perspective, that man, if there was a company that could figure out how to allow it on credit, that's a huge market advantage. But I guess you're saying from a regulatory standpoint, it's just simply not allowed.
Just simply not allowed. Yeah, just simply not allowed. So I think it's look, all of this regulation is coming. The friction that the affordability checks put into the process could really hurt the industry, because there could be people that like to gamble, like to wager, have the money, but just can't, they don't want to open up, that kind of information, or they don't have the time. But I do think there are technologies now that are going to make these things kind of smoother again. It's just like the geofencing tech, which really opened the door for online gaming in the US. Until states could literally lock down your location in the state, there was no way that, federally we were going to have sports betting allowable. But once that tech showed itself to be not just accurate, like pixel pinpoint accurate, we've been able to get this kind of state by state rollout.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure I'm crazy about Big Brother telling me, how much I can bet based on how much money I have. I mean, that's pretty.
It's very un-American.
Yeah. So, gosh, I got 1,000.
You know what? As I said at the start, I do think it's a really interesting point for the industry to kind of take note that the UK gaming industry and betting industry really didn't regulate itself successfully. And I think that is, you've got to be responsible, show that, and get that narrative out, not just to the regulators and the government, not just to the media, but the general, the citizens in general, and make sure that people understand that, you're doing the right job. So, yeah.
Well, hey, I got 1,000 more questions, but we're running out of time. So let me just wrap up on Australia.
Could you try again?
What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Your computer speaks to you in a British accent. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna convert as an American. That sounds odd to me. Tell me. So I'm really curious about Australia and this ban. So when did the ban take effect, and what are they seeing as far as the impact on the business? The fact that they're not advertising sports betting anymore.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not an expert, I've got to say, James, on the Australian ban. I think the ban came in a couple of months ago. There was already kind of heavy restrictions. Look, what you're going to see in any of this, right, and this is one of the things that all of the regulators have to deal with. If you tell people that they can't sponsor football shirts, that might be a good, that might be a good thing, right? You got a lot of young kids watching their heroes on the field, and they've got the logo of a betting company plastered across their shirt. I think we can probably get with that if that's where it's going. But if you take all of the budgets that these huge companies have, and you say you can't spend on broadcast TV, right, and you can't sponsor at one of the big events at the Super Bowl or something like that, they're not going to just say, okay, fine, we won't use that money. They will use those budgets in another channel, right? And now we have digital channels which are way more effective. So I think, it's got to be something that the industry kind of can get behind and agree with, because if you just come down onto something that's global and you say, we're going to restrict you from this thing that's super visible to us as 50-year-old regulators, who's to know they're not spending now, 4 times the money on TikTok? And this is the kind of thing that the people have to be really aware about, how these regulatory things roll out.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I got an analogy for you because I hadn't thought about it this way, but you're right. Cigarettes in the U.S. I mean, I'm not even sure where or how you're able to advertise them anymore. But guess what? You get a lot of shit in the mail from cigarette companies, which I always thought was weird. It's like, why does a cigarette company send me it's like send away for a free pack of Marlboro? It seems like, but it's the first time I've realized that that's the reason. They've got a marketing budget. They're going to find a way to spend it. They have competition, and so the cigarette companies went to mailers.
Right, and people get really creative, and who's to say that that's not actually more effective? So, I think everyone's got to be responsible in this. And what we've seen from the UK, and it's understandable, there's a big market, it explodes. You've got cash in the bank. Why don't you go and sponsor the World Cup and just go crazy, right? And let's put our betting logo on everybody's shirt. But I think there has to be a continual dialogue, and we have to understand that the good side is technology and regulated companies can spot any problems and help out. The bad side is, they have to make sure that they don't overstep the mark, and do that yourself before somebody else, or before there's a mob outside, or before there's a march about, the dangers of what you're doing. So,
Right. All right. Well, let's leave it there, my friend. I really enjoyed it. Love to have you back on because I got a zillion more questions. Andy Clerkson, direct from London, England, Red Knot Communications. How can people find you out there on the net?
Redknotcoms.com.
Red
I
Knot.
wanted it to be redknot.com, but I couldn't quite get it. So redknotcoms.com.
All right, cool. Thanks, Andy. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, James. Love it.
And thank you all for watching and listening to another episode of Double Down with Breslo. We'll be back soon with another great interview. Take care, everyone.